All right, welcome back to another conversation with Chris. I'm here with Mary today. Mary hiked the Appalachian Trail last year, and I'm curious to hear a bit about her story, her experiences on it, and just kind of general culture on the trail. Hi, Mary. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear about your experience. First of all, what made you want to start to hike the Appalachian Trail?
A series of unfortunate events. That usually is the case for.
Okay, I found this on the web for a series of
My computer decided I did not want that to happen. But anyway, so most people on the trail that I met had something happen to them. They retired usually. There's a lot of retirees on trail. There's a lot of ex-military. Especially after COVID, there are a lot of nurses, especially
Mm,
of the travel nurse variety,
yeah.
that were just kind of burnt out. For me, it was a grisly divorce, and like a lot of other people. And yeah, it was just a really great the trail handed me the opportunity to through hike on a silver platter. I was able to sell my home during the housing bubble in COVID, and yeah, just walked away from my entire life in Louisiana, had to start with a clean slate no matter what I did. So I figured I might as well walk and think about it for 6 months and then get going.
All right, that's awesome. So yeah, you said that you were living in Louisiana, and where did you start the trail?
I started in Georgia, so Springer Mountain, and then did a traditional northbound through hike. Started at the end of March. So yeah, was born and raised in Louisiana. So got the Georgia knee, where you get
Yeah.
some serious knee pain in the Georgia mountains pretty quickly. Within 3 days, had to get off trail and figure that out. But I did. By the time I got to the end of the Smokies, things had righted themselves, and I was able to hike all the way to Maine.
Yeah, I imagine throughout that whole experience, I mean, the difference between the beginning to the end was like quite a lot, quite different,
Yeah.
in your conditioning and everything and what you knew and probably how you felt as well. Um, so yeah, what were some of the challenges throughout your trip? I know you mentioned your knee, but like how long did it take you adapt and like what were some other challenges along the way?
Yeah, definitely that first injury was one of the main things, but it wasn't necessarily because of the injury. Most people will tell you after they hike the trail that it's more of a mental game than it is a physical one, because eventually your body falls in line and you just become a walking machine, and you feed it 5 or 6 thousand calories a day and you do what you got to do. But it can be mentally taxing, especially if you do a traditional northbound through hike. You really pick up speed when you're going through Virginia. For me, I felt like I was at my peak level of fitness in Vermont. And then New Hampshire and the whites just smack you right in the face with some really serious terrain. And you felt really, really strong right up until you got there. And then suddenly, instead of doing 25 miles a day, you're doing 10 miles a day, and it's taking you 12 hours to do it just because of how difficult the terrain is. So the mental challenge is really tough because it's pretty relentless, and it's a great time, but relentless.
All right, so you mentioned up there the terrain getting more difficult. Was is the elevation just a lot higher, or also the trail is less kind of paved?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. So you will have some really steep ascents and descents. Further south, the trail maintainers they do a really good job of cutting switchbacks, and these places between mountains, you're going over the crest of the Appalachians the whole time. So you're like going down into these what they call gaps, and then proceeding back up onto the ridges, and veering off and going into valleys to get into town and that kind of thing. But when you get up into New Hampshire and Maine, they call those gaps notches, because it's just a very, straight down, straight up notch carved out between mountains, unlike anything that you've seen. One infamous one in particular is called the Mahoosic Notch. Right after you enter Maine, it is basically a rock pile, where it's just a through hiker jungle gym where you're climbing up and over and through boulders. And then when you get to the end of it, you're rewarded with one of the most straight up vertical challenging climbs of the entire trail up the arm. So
All right. And then another thing, you mentioned that you started in March of last year. So I'm curious, that's kind of coming out of COVID. I mean, there was a couple summers during COVID before you did it, I suppose, but I feel like things were still kind of shut down around then. Did you notice that that it was, I mean, I know without experience in the previous years you wouldn't know, but through talking with other people, did you hear that it was like busier last year or?
yeah, so the class of 2022, I think our class was a record-breaking year for the amount of people on trail. 2020, there were people that were out there and they
Yeah,
hiked during COVID. I, can't say whether or not I recommend that or
yeah,
think it's a good idea. The class of 21 was coming out of COVID. And the ATC actually didn't recognize hikes that started before May of 2021, I think. So the
okay,
numbers are skewed there. But by 2022, a lot of the people that had gotten burnt out with their jobs, particularly people in the medical field, found their way to the trail. So I was solidly in the bubble when I started, and I wasn't able to stay in a hostel until several hundred miles into my through hike because they were all completely full. So all of those 0 days where there were 0 miles hiked because I was hurt, I had to, stay in a hotel and eat the cost of that because there are just so many people on trail.
okay. Yeah, that was going to be my next question about like accommodation and everything. Because obviously with record amount of people, it gets harder and harder to find places to sleep. Did you do much camping? Did you I guess you were able to stay at hostels sometimes, and sometimes you had to mix in hotels.
Yeah, in the beginning, I had to mix in more hotels than I wanted to because just the sheer number of people. When you're out on the trail, though, the AT has shelter areas and shelters. They don't always include shelter, the buildings, but there are established camping areas. You can camp anywhere outside them except in, particular sections of the trail like the Smokies and Baxter State Park. But for the most part, I would stay around the shelter areas. In the beginning of the trail, I had a tent. When I made it to Massachusetts, I switched over to a hammock, which allowed me to camp pretty much wherever I wanted. But yeah, once I got, I would say through Tennessee into Virginia, all of my town stays, when I got off the trail to do my resupply and wanted to stay somewhere, I was able to stay in hostels. But before then, it was a hotel. It was very
Yeah,
pricey.
okay. Yeah, so you mentioned at some point you probably got rid of your tent and got the
Yeah.
hammock. Did
Mhm.
you did you find that you like minimized or simplified with a lot of other things during that time?
I wouldn't necessarily say that my hammock minimized or simplified my kit. It made
Okay.
it more complicated, but I there are some things that I got rid of. I think I had an extra set of clothes in the beginning, and then it was just like, you're gonna be stinky. Don't
Yeah.
just wear your rain jacket and your rain pants when you're doing laundry. People will look at you funny, but it's whatever. But no, my hammock system actually, it added more weight and it added a layer of complexity that didn't exist with the tent, but I slept so much better.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, because you're off the ground. I don't know, was when you were camping in the tent, was the ground cold? Did you have like a sleeping pad or?
I had a sleeping pad and it insulated pretty well. I had to camp on the snow a couple times when I was on trail, and I stayed perfectly warm. My particular issue is that my air pad would keep leaking, and there would be a hole, and I would patch the hole, and then another one would come up, and then a seam would fail. And when you're waking up every hour on the hour to refill your sleeping pad, you're not getting a ton of sleep. So I there was and that combined with the fact that my tent started leaking around Massachusetts, I just woke up one day in a puddle on a rapidly deflating
Oh,
raft, basically, and turned to one of my friends that I was hiking with who had a hammock, and I was like, show me which one to buy because I'm
yeah.
done. It removes the problem child of the leaking air pad from the equation. So
Yeah, as you say, it's a mental game as well. And if you're not getting good sleep or if you're frustrated with those situations, it can probably take a lot out of you and you
oh
need
yeah,
that motivation to keep yourself going, right?
yeah. And snacks help
Um,
with that, the mental aspect as well. I had a friend that he started hiking north and he flipped halfway through and started hiking south, so he went through the hardest parts of the trail before I did. And his one piece of advice for the whites was to pack all of your favorite snacks and nothing but your favorite snacks, because that's the only thing that could save you in that
yeah,
really
okay.
challenging terrain.
So yeah, I know you have to consume a lot of calories. You said 5 or 6,000 calories a day. How would you typically supplement your calories? I mean, were you eating sticks of butter, stuff like that? I mean, I know a lot of people do that. So
They will. I've witnessed it. It is
yeah,
full and terrifying and a wondrous thing to behold. Olive oil, pretty much everyone had the little bottles
okay,
of olive oil, and we would do that. Um, Really, it was just like the volume, the amount of food that I was eating. My food bag was always the heaviest thing that I was carrying because it was just bursting with resupply every time I left town. Um, my last stretch, I had enough food for 7 days to go through the 100-mile wilderness. I finished it in 5 days and I still ran out of food towards the end of it. So
all
I
right,
was just eating constantly like everybody else.
yeah, okay. Um, and you mentioned averaging like say 25 miles a day. Is that did you typically have a goal or every day you kind of go with the flow and get to where you are, or you have an idea in mind of where a good like camp or rest stop is?
Yeah. So I didn't average 25 miles a day over the entire thing, but there are certain sections like through Virginia
Okay.
where you
Yeah.
can average that mileage. I would say my average mileage was somewhere around 12 or 13 miles a
Okay.
day, across the whole thing. But generally, what I would do and what most people would do is when they got into town for they ran out of food, get into town, plan your resupply, you would just look to the next town or the next resupply point and, divide your days by, usually I would divide by like an average of 15 miles a day. And from there, you would have your little app called Far Out, scroll through the map to the next spot, see how much food you need for how many days, and then just kind of choose from there. But it was really more of a go with the flow kind of thing. There's this notion that the AT is a really remote wilderness area, and there are certain
Yeah.
parts of it that definitely are. But in a lot of places on the AT, you could feasibly get into town almost every night. It's not
Yeah.
as people think it is.
That's actually what I was thinking. I was going to ask about how often you resupply, because I know that it's been, it's fairly well traveled. So I imagine there's enough infrastructure in place with accommodation, with stores, with places to support the hikers and everything. But yeah, on average, how often would you say you would go to town?
Usually every 5 days, at
Okay.
least at least once a week.
Yeah.
Um, you could technically carry more food than that, but that really weighs you down and makes
Yeah.
you slower. So you're not really gaining much by carrying that much. It kind of cancels itself out if you carry a lot of weight in food.
Yeah. Okay. And did you make it through on your original pair of shoes?
No, no, no,
No, okay.
definitely. Um, I had Hocus Pocus and I love them. I had no foot troubles, no blisters, no foot pain, no nothing. They're the best shoe out there, in my opinion, which is going to make a lot of ultra people really mad. But
Okay.
if they ever hear this, but I went through 5 pairs of shoes, and that's
5 pairs.
mhm.
Wow. Is that normal?
Yeah, you can usually get it depends on what shoe you have. If you have a really sturdy boot, you could get as
Yeah.
much as 800 miles off of it, but the
Yeah.
Hokas
Okay.
are kind of on the lower end. They'll get about 500 miles. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Yeah. So you started in Georgia and you ended in, you say Vermont or New Hampshire?
No, in Maine. I hiked all the
Oh,
way.
in Maine. Sorry. So Maine. And so how many miles is that from like that section of the United States Appalachian Trail?
Yeah, my year it was 2,193.4 miles.
All
Every year
right.
changes slightly. So I
Okay.
think this year the trail is slightly longer because there was an unofficial reroute in New York that we could have taken last year, but wasn't part of the official route that they
Okay.
made the official route, which I think added like another 3 miles. So
Okay. Well,
time
then you
change.
that's a official trail miles, but then every time you're going off the trail to go into town, you're adding more mileage there, right?
Oh yeah, and then once
Yeah.
you're in town, you're walking around
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're going from the grocery store to the laundromat to, whatever restaurant. Usually, if I could find a Mexican restaurant, that's where you could find me.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. All right. So you just mentioned laundromats, and I'm sure I imagine at some points you were washing your clothes by hand as well. I'm sure a lot of people do.
oh yeah, yeah.
What are what are what
Go ahead.
I imagine that's something you didn't really do in your normal life before, washing your clothes by hand.
No.
Yeah, so
Also,
what are
now
some
it's
other
more.
things? What are some other things you experienced during the trail that were like, I don't want to say outside your comfort zone, but more primitive ways of living that you wouldn't have done before?
Oh, your definition of what dirty feels like,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
becomes very lax. You get really disgusting out there, and you're just kind of like, it's fine. Um, my record for the longest stretch without taking a shower, which for me, taking a shower involves soap and an actual shower and like a
yeah.
washcloth. We do the washcloth. It my record was 16 days.
All right,
So
it's
between in
impressive.
that time, I definitely would jump into like rivers and stuff and just
Yeah,
like try to get it off of me. But that was the longest stretch without soap being involved. And it was a time.
yeah. And did you come across many people, or did you use wet wipes sometimes, or find like use just water bottles or alternative ways to shower and just kind of clean up?
Yeah, people had wet wipes, and every once in a while I would carry wet wipes. It's a weight issue. You can
Yeah.
find dehydrated ones that you can pour
Okay.
water into and then reactivate them.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think I wasn't the most disgusting out there. I know
Oh,
someone
yeah, I know. I'm sure
like
you were not.
I'm not gonna name her, but I'm gonna send her this.
Some people are laughing that you said 17 days because they're thinking, man, I went probably 75 days, or, I'm
Mhm.
sure a lot of people went quite a while without any real showers.
Yeah, but I mean that the food that you eat, when I would get into town, the first thing that I would do is, aside from take that shower, um, would be to go to the store and get my resupply, and I would always get like a party tray of veggies because there's no way for you to take that into the woods with you and
Yeah.
keep it without it spoiling. So my breakfast was just oatmeal and peanut butter. My dinner was instant mashed potatoes and tuna pretty much every night that I was on trail. I don't know how I'm not sick of it yet, because when I go backpacking now, I still eat mashed potatoes. If I'm at a restaurant and mashed potatoes are there, I'll still order them. But in my real life, I eat, vegetables and other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
you know, Food becomes more like, what's the calories per ounce
Yeah.
ratio? and less of the experience of eating. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So were you cooking, or were you staying really simple and just kind of mixing the mashed potatoes in a cup or something with water? Did you have
Yeah.
like a little burner?
Yeah, I carried a stove the whole way. A lot of people will cold soak, which sounds
Hmm.
miserable and disgusting to me. But there are two schools of thought there. Some people will get like a little Talenti jar usually, and they'll put ramen in there, or like beans, or a north side, or mashed potatoes, and put cold water
Yeah.
in there with it, and just kind of carry it around all day. And then at the end of the day, eat it. And then some people like me, warm up your little pot with your water so you have something warm and cooked at the end of the day. Um, but yeah, I carried a stove the whole way. Even when it was really hot, I still had, hot coffee in the morning and
Yeah.
potatoes every
Well, I
night.
think some of those, some of that as well is good for morale. It can keep you positive, and like a warm meal at night
Mhm.
can be kind of a game changer. I mean, you can survive without it, but again, to add some comforts along the way
Yeah,
can help,
yeah.
I'm sure.
The main tool in your toolbox for battling the like mental battle of through hiking is basically treating yourself like a toddler. You just go, oh, why are you crying? Do you need to take a nap? Do you want some more mashed potatoes? I had a deal with myself in Virginia, that when I would get to the top of a mountain, because they say Virginia is flat, it's not. I would reward myself with Skittles. So,
All
only the
right.
red purple ones. So you make those deals with yourself all day long. You're like, okay, if you get to the top of this thing, then you can listen to 20 minutes of a podcast, or you can have that Snickers bar you've been carrying for the last 30 miles. You
Yeah.
play those games with yourself to
Yeah.
keep yourself going.
Um, so yeah, I mentioned earlier, like if you look back on your mindset, like right before you started the trail until like you finished the trail, um, can you talk about some of the things that you noticed changed within you, and kind of looking back on the beginning or before you started, like how, I don't want to say how dumb you were, but you probably thought, oh, you don't have a clue until you do it, right? You don't know what you don't know. So can you talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. My longest backpacking trip before I got on the AT was 3 days.
Okay.
So I did not know what I was doing at all. I went on a bunch of what we call shakedown hikes to, take your gear out there and test it. But because I had a full-time job, it was, what I could do on the weekends. And so I went into that not knowing a lot and being really insecure about not knowing a lot, and feeling like I was surrounded by people who knew way more than me, and
Yeah.
feeling self-conscious about that, and then being, anxious to camp alone, and being scared of all the night critter noises that would, visit you in camp and all of that. From the beginning of the trail to the end of the trail, I became confident, because you learn as you go. You
Yeah.
either learn or you get off trail, and either one of those is fine. I have a lot of respect for people that get to the trail and face the challenge of it, and then recognize that it's not for them, and they get off, because there are people out there that'll really stay with something that's not serving them and it's not healthy for them. So um luckily for me, it ended up being the right choice to stay. And yeah, just way more confident with backpacking, of course, but also just generally, um, way less anxious about things. Things just kind of roll off of me more than they did before the trail. Because now when I encounter things that are challenging or scary, I just see it as something to learn from. When now I have kind of this rule of thumb: if something's kind of like spooking me a little bit, where before I would categorize that as anxiety, now I'm like, no, I'm just excited. I'm excited to learn something new and try something new and be challenged. I look forward to challenges more than I did before the trail.
Yeah, as you talk about confidence, yeah, going through something like that is yeah, kind of bound to make you more confident because you're like overcoming so many obstacles. I mean, every day you're pushing through, and then at the end of it, you're like, man, I just walked 2,000 plus miles, right? It's like it's pretty cool experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. There's no way to do it until you do it. Especially speaking as a woman that talks to other women's and other women's other women and Facebook, there's a ton of groups out there for women specific or class of 2023 through hikers where they're like, how do you do this? And it's just, you got to do it. Um, there is a lot of doubt. I can't tell you the number of times, not typically other through hikers, but usually town people when we would go into town, you'd be standing in line at checkout and they would look at you and go, wait, what are you doing? You would tell them, I'm through hiking the trail. And it was always, are you alone? Does
Uh-huh.
your husband know that you're
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why aren't you carrying a gun? Aren't you
Yeah.
terrified? No, I'm really not. Because the trail is honestly one of the safest places to be. The only
Yeah.
times that I was ever nervous for like my safety, in that sense, was when I was in town. Um,
Yeah.
I would never camp near road crossings because you don't. Only the most motivated serial killers would walk 20 miles into the woods to get you. So
Yeah.
it's very unlikely that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, like unfortunately you mentioned the fear. Well, that like everybody's kind of natural response to you is like, whoa, what? And it's unfortunate because that shows how much fear is out there.
Mhm.
And I would say that's probably another thing that led to your having more peace of mind towards the end. Number one, you're depending less on money, right? You're kind of living a more natural life. I mean, you're camping, you're in nature, you're not like in the daily grind of working and spending money and all that, right? So you get to kind of like decompress from all that.
Yeah, definitely. You
Um,
definitely decompress from it and you become more in tune with yourself and what you
mhm,
need from yourself every day. You wake up with the sun every single morning. If the sun started rising at like 5:30 in the morning, it didn't matter. I was up. The moment it set, if it started setting at 6 or 7, which it started to do towards the end as I got
mhm,
further north, I was out. And you you stop when you're tired. If you feel a blister coming on your foot, the only thing that you can do there is listen to the cues
yeah,
that you're giving you, sit down and, have that kind of reckoning with yourself and go, okay, something's up. I need to fix this. You really become more in tune with your own instincts.
mhm,
And I became more in tune with my own instincts out there, way more than I did before. And
yeah.
that's lingered since.
So that's another thing I wanted to ask. Like, so you talked about how things change between the beginning and the end of the trail, but then we're talking probably nearly a year later now. How has your life changed since leaving the trail and going back to, I don't know what your situation is now, if you're back to the real world and working or not, but how has that changed your perspective on life? How has that changed you just overall?
Mhm. Nothing will ruin you for the real world, and nothing will ruin your career more than through hiking. That's the word of caution that I give to anyone because it will no longer be satisfying. It just won't. It's you can go into a job and work out a purpose from that job, but it's really, really hard. And you will definitely start to see it more as like, I am here to get a paycheck
Yeah.
and back in the rat race. And when is my next through hike? Because
Yeah.
I can't deal with this anymore. Um, but yeah, I would say that the transition back into the real world and the workforce and everything was one of the more challenging things about the
Yeah.
through. Definitely one of the more challenging things. There were some like really strange and dramatic things that I didn't even think of, like just noise and sensory overload,
Mm,
coming back out of the woods and being confronted with traffic and people and,
yeah.
you know,
And exhaust and noises and honking and
yeah, you get to a point when you're on trail that you can tell who's a day hiker and who's, you know, a through
uh
hiker. You can
just by the
smell,
energy.
you can
Oh yeah.
smell them.
Oh
You
wow.
you can go, oh, I know that you're using not only laundry detergent, but you have fabric softener in the mix as well. And it's a completely different smell from your deodorant. And are you
Yeah.
actually wearing cologne on this hike? Because I
Yeah.
have to. And these are all
I
very
gotcha.
distinct.
Yeah.
So sensory overload, but also just, you know, it's hard to re-enter the rat race after you've experienced total freedom like that, and after you've
Yeah.
had the immense privilege of experiencing that freedom, because it takes, you have to have, you know, a budget laying around in order to do that and pay your bills, and if you have any outstanding debt that you have to pay on. I was really lucky financially be able to
Hmm.
do that. A lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah,
want
for
to
sure.
complain about it too much because I'm also very fortunate to have a job now.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
imagine that experience has humbled you as well, seeing different types of people, everybody's different situation they're going through, and yeah.
yeah, big time.
And can you talk a little bit about the culture on the trail through hikers? You know, what some things you've observed, learned about the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went onto the trail as an introvert and I walked off of that apparently as an extrovert. I love people. I love, you know, meeting new people and talking to them. And that was definitely not something that I did before. No, I was inside my air conditioned box, get the people away from me. If the doorbell rings, I'm gonna like peek through the curtains and be like, ugh, I'm just gonna go hide. I'm not here. Turn out all the lights. But um the the main thing about the culture on trail is that it doesn't matter where you came from, what brought you to the trail, what your past experience was, because you had kids that were 18 years old coming out of high school that decided they were going to do a gap year. And then you contrast that with people who are retired, you know, from their 30 or 40-year long careers, that are finally chasing the dream after they waited to get their pensions and for their kids to grow up and move out of the house. Then you have ex-military. There's a lot of ex-military on there. There's a lot of travel nurses on there. But regardless of your background and the differences that you have between these people, those differences don't really matter. Because at the end of the day, everyone out there has one really big thing in common. They all love the trail. They were all bitten by the through hiker bug, and something drove them to go live in the woods for 6 months, which is, it's not something that a lot of people do. So it's a very special kind of crazy that goes out there, and you have that in common with everyone around you. So you will walk up to another person, instantly know that they're a through hiker, sit down and just start talking about what brought you to the trail. That was usually one of the first things that we would talk
Yeah.
about. It's like, oh, you know, what are you in for kind of conversation? Like, what
Hmm.
brought you here? What was it, the COVID trauma that everyone else has? Was it your divorce? Did you get, you know, did you retire? Had you always planned to do this with your dad and your dad passed away? There are a lot of people like that as well. And the ability to connect with people out there it's far easier than it is here, because
Yeah.
you already have that rapport with each other that you don't have in the real world, or
Yeah.
we imagine that we don't have.
Yeah.
um
Well,
you
it's
know
also you're in a similar situation. It's easier to go up to somebody and start a conversation because you immediately know you have something in common. I mean, you're on a trail, kind of not in the middle of nowhere, but you know you're all on a similar mission, and yeah, it becomes easier to probably bond with them and start conversation
Mhm.
and all that.
Yeah, and it really, that's trail culture, but it also taught me something about what it is to exist out here in the real world with the real people.
Hmm.
um our differences don't aren't actually they don't actually make us that different. You
Yeah.
can usually find common ground with someone regardless of who they vote for, or
Yeah.
where they came from, or which county they're from, or if they're from the north or the south. Being from Louisiana, that's usually a pretty big distinguisher, but it's not.
Yeah.
You can find common ground with almost anyone if you take the time to slow down and listen to them and talk to
Yeah.
them.
I totally agree. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed hearing, learning a bit about the trail and hearing about your story and everything. So I just wanted to thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And is there anything else you have to say before we go?
No, that's pretty much it. Thank you for having me on.
All right.
It's
Yeah, for
fun
sure
to talk
thing.
about the trail.
All right. Well, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too, Chris.
All righty. Bye.